The question we are going to address today is Facebook really biased towards the BJP? Is it really favoring the BJP? Because just over the weekend, a story was published in the Wall Street Journal, one of the most renowned newspaper publications of the world. And it had a story. It wasn't a very elaborate story. It was just a story citing some very unverifiable sources, which was meant to conclude that somehow the Facebook organization, the organization as a whole, and the social media platform, it's favoring the BJP. Now let's go through the story first. Now the story was about T. Raja Singh, a minister in the BJP government, as we've seen them today, and he wrote something against the Rohingya Muslims, which was, of course, way out of the line, way too violent for a social media platform. And Facebook blocked that post for all the right reasons. Now, the Wall Street Journal, they took up that story. They said how, because T. Raja Singh was allowed to say what he said, that Facebook was favoring the BJP. There was also the talk about the pages being banned before the 2019 elections. That was the story in the crux, that somehow Facebook is favoring the BJP. And interestingly, they did not call it the BJP, in fact. In the article, it's first mentioned as the Hindu Nationalist Party. I don't really understand, for a political party that has the biggest ground network in the world, why can't two reporters of the Wall Street Journal get the name right? Why do they need to call it Hindu Nationalist Party way in the beginning of the article? That was my first actual problem with the article, because it tries to portray a certain image of the party and thus of the entire piece. And this is not just Wall Street Journal. I've read this in Economist, I've read this in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and a couple of other outlets, New York Times, for example. All of them like to call the BJP as Hindu Nationalist Party. Clearly, they have missed the 390 million bank accounts, which did not differentiate between Hindus and other religions. They did not care to see the LPG cylinders that were distributed. They did not care to look at the 80 crore people being fed right now as the pandemic rages on from April to November. They haven't bothered to check if it was just Hindus who were fed or every Indian that was fed. So this filter with which the foreign publications see the BJP, the Hindu nationalist filter, that really needs to go. It's obsolete. It's almost obnoxious in a way. And when some reporter wants to use that phrase to define the BJP, to define the NDA, you really don't want to take that article seriously. But let's move on with the discussion. So the discussion was about T. Raja Singh, and the article said that Facebook, when it comes to its business considerations, it takes into context the political realities of India. Well, for one, those reporters should know that's happening with every business across the world. In case they have been living under a rock, there was a trade war going on between the US and China. And every big organization, every MNC, it has to take into consideration certain political considerations. That's not like Facebook did something very different. But did it really favor? Let's move on. Now, other thing which was said very recently, when Twitter blocked Donald Trump's post, one of the tweets that were blocked because of it was propagating violence. This was just around the Black Lives Matter protest. What Mark Zuckerberg said actually made a lot of sense to me. You may agree or disagree. You can drop that in the comments. He said politicians should be allowed to say what they want to say. Of course, there'll be a line. For instance, there was a line for T. Raja Singh. But he said politicians must be allowed to say what they want to say so that the people can see them as they are. And I really agree to that, because if Rahul Gandhi really believes that Narendra Modi has given a piece of Jammu and Kashmir or the Ladakh sector to China, he should be able to tweet that freely, however false or misleading that is. If Rahul Gandhi really feels that he can be the best prime minister India has ever seen, he should be allowed to tweet it. There's no harm in letting politicians tweet what they really want to. If someone wants to tweet something stupid, they must be allowed to do so. If someone wants to tweet something very wrong, factually incorrect, opinionated, in for instance, they should be allowed to do so, because social media is all about voicing your opinion. Now, if you start putting filters on that opinion, then it becomes a problem. And this is where I agreed with Mark Zuckerberg, and I do not agree with Twitter, which tries to be the editor of the voices, the famous or the prominent voices. But what is really the reality? What is really happening? Let's look at some aspects. I'll draw some realities on the ground which are seen. Firstly, if you look at Facebook, I'll take the first aspect. If you look at Facebook in America, it has silenced conservative voices too. It has silenced voices on the Republican side too. In fact, a lot of times Mark Zuckerberg had to address a Congress testimony. He had to be there facing the questions from senators, Republicans especially, answering why Facebook was seen as anti-Republican. Why was it seen more pro-democratic? Now this is one aspect, and now they come to India and suddenly they are facing this backlash against the Congress, against BJP. For instance, they're being seen as collaborators. So Facebook across the world, even in Europe, this discussion occurred. It has never been seen as favoring one political ideology across the world. So to say that Facebook favors the BJP, that's a very naive statement to make, and just on the basis of a few posts by one certain minister. This is a country of 130 crore people. A lot of people are on Facebook, and a lot of posts are made daily. But if you want to pinpoint one minister in the government and a few pages which were taken down and no mention was made of them before the 2019 elections, that really doesn't add up. That just looks like a looking at something as per one's convenience and drawing a conclusion that favors one's opinion. That's what the report of Wall Street Journal felt like. But the first aspect is Facebook across the world has never been seen as favoring one political ideology. That's one aspect. The second aspect, and this is something I've been speaking about for a long time. I've written about it too. The social media, what it did around 2012, 13, 14, especially in India, and 15, 16 in the United States, it showed the leftists their mirror. For long, the leftists had a dominance over what was published in newspapers, over the editorials, what went into magazines. They had a control over the narrative. Nothing is more visible than it was in India. The leftists had a dominance over the narrative. They wanted to they wanted to have people perceive government policies in a certain way. They did that. They wanted to have government perceive the Kargil war in a certain way. They did that. Go back to the 1990s. Look, remember that video from Barkha Dutt when she says that the Kashmiri exodus was somewhat justified because they had occupied all the plum postings. That's just one fleeting example I'm giving you. Go back to the years between 2002 and 2014 when the likes of many prominent primetime journalists made everything possible to convince the people, the viewers of India, that Narendra Modi, the potential prime minister then, was Motka Sodagar, and Rahul Gandhi, who has never won an election in his life on his own name, on his own capacity, on his own capability, was the prime minister this country needed. Go back to those times without social media and think how much control the narratives, how much control the left had over the narratives which were published in magazines, in newspapers. What did social media do? It brought everyone on the same playing ground. Now, suddenly every voice was equal, be it the minister on the left wing or the right wing, center right, center left. It did not matter. It did not matter which party you were supporting. If you made sense, you got the followers, you got the traction, you got the attention. And that is what the left hated. They saw the first idea in India in 2014. Then in 16, the intolerance debate did not work. The Aman Ki Asha thing did not work. By 2019, when the Narendra Modi government won its second election, even the leftists realized that even though we've been cribbing about the government policies all day on Twitter and Facebook, the truth is something else. So what did the social media do? It broke the leftist bubble. It broke the dominance the left had over all the publications, over the narrative. And this is why the left loves hating social media, beginning with Facebook. And this piece was another example of that. So the second aspect is, the second reality is that the left loves hating social media. Now, third, let's say for one wild second, let's assume that the logic quoted in the Wall Street Journal made sense. So by that logic, the Twitter logic here should also apply. Remember that photo from Twitter CEO Jack, where he's holding a poster saying, "Say no to Brahmin patriarchy." So what do we make of it? Is Twitter biased or Twitter against Brahmins? Is Twitter against Hindus? So does it make sense to ban Twitter along with TikTok and 58 other Chinese apps? Do we really need to start going on that line? These are the three realities that are very visible. One, that FB has silenced conservative voices too. It is also seen as anti-republican, anti-right. That's the one reality. So you cannot say that Facebook favors a certain political ideology by nitpicking certain posts or certain instances. That's just wrong. The second reality is that the left loves hating the social media because it breaks its dominance, it breaks the bubble it has been living in for decades. It shows it's the true mirror. The third reality is that it's not just Facebook, it's Twitter also, which has been indulging in activities like this. But perhaps Facebook is coming under attack because Mark Zuckerberg has been seen close to Narendra Modi, or Facebook has made a hefty investment in Reliance's Jio, which is again seen very close to the government. So it could be either of the three realities or all three. Now, I'll also talk a bit about the reactions from Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party. Rahul Gandhi was quick to tweet that this is the nexus between WhatsApp, Facebook, and Narendra Modi government. To be honest, at this time, I'm surprised that Rahul Gandhi has not chosen to blame Jadoo from Koi Mil Gaya for his election defeat, because only that is left. Ravi Shankar Prasad, the law and IT minister, he pointed out correctly that you cannot attribute your own incapabilities to social media. People are not just voting on behalf of social media, they are voting on a number of aspects. They are voting for the work you've done. Now, Amethi does not have internet connection, so it pretty much does not have social media. So, or a lot of social media users, perhaps. So, why did Rahul Gandhi get voted out of there? Why is his vote share declining in Raebareli, his mother's constituency? These are the questions that need answering to. So, what Rahul Gandhi said, again, makes no sense. And what the congressmen following him said, likes of Shashi Tharoor, that there needs to be a parliamentary panel discussing how much Facebook is aligned with the BJP, well, they should just go back in time. Remember, they had hired the services of Cambridge Analytica, which was processing user data to win elections. That's the two reactions I wanted to talk about. But to conclude, there's one important question that needs to be answered. It's just not India. It's the question is going to come up as the US elections draw closer. Can social media platforms be the filter for truth or false, or can they be the morality facilitators? No, they cannot be. It's almost naive to expect that Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or WhatsApp or even TikTok for that matter, they can actually be harbingers of morality. They can be the facilitators of morality. These are social media platforms. Compare it with a notebook. The notebook gives you a space to write, to pen down your thoughts. It's not responsible for the morality of your thoughts. That's how I see social media. You may agree or disagree. You could put that in the comments. We could probably have a debate on that. But social media offers a way to voice your opinion. It's not responsible or shouldn't be responsible for judging your opinion. Because if it starts doing that, where do we draw the line? Because one man's opinion is another man's extremism. And one man's extremism is another man's religion, perhaps. And one man's religion is another man's terrorism. So you never know where you're going to stop. Someday, one opinion will come up, 50 people will agree to it, 500 will disagree, and your entire social media algorithms, they'll be in a mess. So to conclude, social media cannot be the morality facilitator. It just needs to be what it is, a platform to voice the opinions. And as Mark Zuckerberg correctly said, there will always be a line. You cannot call for violence on social media and get away with it. You cannot go into the pornography side, or you cannot go into the child abuse side and then say that this is my opinion. Of course, there'll be always be a line, as there is in the real world. But the left, which wants to police the social media because it has broken its dominance, they must really stop. There is no perfect way, not even remotely close, that you can actually have social media platforms becoming morality facilitators, becoming the ideal playground for certain political ideology. As Mark Zuckerberg rightly says, people should see politicians for what they are, and people should be able to see people for what they are and then make their decisions. So is Facebook really inclined towards the BJP? Well, it's not. But the reporters who wrote that piece in the Wall Street Journal, they surely are inclined towards the political side. And since they're not finding any traction for their political ideas on social media, this was nothing but a cheap trick, a cheap hack to attack Mark Zuckerberg, the idea of free speech on social media, and of course, the Hindu Nationalist Party, as I love to call it. Thank you.